My name is Sarah Martinez, and I'm 28 years old. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am, sitting in what used to be my father's study in Austin, Texas, surrounded by papers that have completely changed my understanding of my family. Let me start from the beginning, from the day that broke my heart, and unknowingly set me on a path I never could have imagined. It was a cold February morning when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my brother Michael's name, and I remember feeling a strange knot in my stomach before I even answered. Michael and I hadn't spoken in almost 6 months, not since our last argument about Dad's health and what we should do about his increasingly stubborn refusal to move to assisted living. Sarah, his voice was flat, emotionless. Dad passed away yesterday. The words hit me like a physical blow. I dropped the coffee mug I was holding, and it shattered on my apartment's hardwood floor, the sound echoing in the sudden silence that filled my world. What? When? How? I managed to stammer, my legs giving out as I sank into the nearest chair. Heart attack. It was quick, Michael said, and I could hear something strange in his voice. Not just grief, but something else, something cold. The funeral is Thursday, Riverside Cemetery, 2 o'clock. I'll be there, I said immediately, already mentally rearranging my work schedule, thinking about flights from Denver to Austin. Do you need help with anything? The arrangements, It's handled, he cut me off. Everything's handled. The line went dead, and I stared at my phone, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. My father, Roberto Martinez, was gone. The man who had raised me after Mom died when I was 12, who had taught me to change a tire and balance a checkbook, who had called me every Sunday without fail for the past 10 years, he was gone, and I hadn't even known he was sick. I called in sick to work. I was a graphic designer at a small firm in Denver, and spent the next 2 days in a haze of grief and travel preparations. I kept trying to call Michael back, wanting to talk about Dad, to share memories, to plan together, but he never answered. Each call went straight to voicemail, and my messages went unreturned. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical February weather for Austin. I had flown in the night before and stayed at a hotel near the airport, not wanting to impose on Michael, though part of me had hoped he might offer. I put on my black dress, the same one I'd worn to Mom's funeral 16 years earlier, and drove to Riverside Cemetery with my heart pounding and my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I arrived 15 minutes early, wanting to have a moment alone with Dad before the service began. But as I walked through the cemetery gates, I saw something that stopped me cold. There, about 100 yards away, was a small gathering of people around a graveside. A minister was speaking, and I could see Michael in his black suit, standing with his wife Jennifer and their 2 kids. The funeral had already started. I ran, my heels catching in the soft earth, not caring how I looked. But as I approached the group, Michael looked up and saw me coming. His expression didn't change, no surprise, no guilt, nothing. He simply turned back to the minister and continued listening as if I weren't there. I reached the edge of the small crowd, maybe 20 people, mostly neighbors and Dad's old work colleagues from his days as an electrician, and stood there, breathing hard, trying to process what was happening. The minister was in the middle of the service, talking about Dad's life, his dedication to his family, his kindness to his community. "Excuse me?" I whispered to Mrs. Chen, Dad's next-door neighbor for the past 15 years. "What time did this start?" She looked at me with confusion and sympathy. "Oh, honey, it started at 1:30. Didn't you know? 1:30, not 2 o'clock. Michael had deliberately given me the wrong time. I stood there for the remaining 10 minutes of the service, watching my father's casket being lowered into the ground, listening to people share memories I hadn't been invited to hear from the beginning. When it was over, when the last shovelful of dirt had been thrown and people began to disperse, Michael walked past me without a word. "Michael," I called after him, my voice cracking. "Michael, wait." He stopped and turned around, his face a mask of cold indifference. "What, Sarah?" "Why?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "Why would you do this? He was my father too." "Was he?" Michael's voice was bitter. "Because for the last 5 years, while I was here taking care of him, where were you? In Denver, living your life, too busy to visit, too important to help. That's not fair," I protested. "I called him every week. I sent money when he needed it. I offered to move back, but he told me to stay in Denver, to build my career." "He told you that because he didn't want to be a burden," Michael interrupted. "But I was here, Sarah. I was here when he fell and broke his hip. I was here when he got confused and left the stove on. I was here when he cried because he missed Mom. Where were you? His words cut deep because there was truth in them, but not the whole truth. I didn't know, I said weakly. You never told me how bad it was getting. If I had known, you would have what? Flown down for a weekend and then gone back to your life? Michael shook his head. Face it, Sarah. You abandoned him just like you abandoned this family when you moved to Denver. I didn't abandon anyone, I said, anger rising through my grief. I was building a life. Dad supported that. He was proud of me. Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. Proud? Maybe. But you weren't here when he needed you. And now it's too late. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the cemetery as the last of the mourners disappeared. I stayed there for another hour, talking to Dad's headstone, telling him how sorry I was, how much I loved him, how much I was going to miss our Sunday phone calls. That night, alone in my hotel room, I made a decision. I would stay in Austin for a few more days, go through Dad's house, try to understand what had really happened in the months before his death. Maybe I could find some answers, some closure, some way to make peace with the guilt that was eating me alive. The next morning, I drove to Dad's house, the same small ranch-style home where Michael and I had grown up. The key was still hidden under the fake rock by the front steps, just where it had been when we were kids. As I let myself in, the smell of Dad's cologne and coffee hit me like a wave, and I had to lean against the doorframe to steady myself. The house was exactly as I remembered it, but somehow smaller, sadder. Dad's coffee cup was still in the sink, unwashed. His reading glasses were on the kitchen table next to a folded newspaper. His favorite chair in the living room still bore the impression of his body, and I found myself sitting in it, trying to feel close to him somehow. I spent the morning wandering through the house, touching his things, remembering. In his bedroom, I found the framed photo of our family from my college graduation. Mom had been gone for 6 years by then, but Dad had insisted on taking me out to celebrate, just the two of us. He looked so proud in that picture, so happy. Had Michael been wrong? Had Dad really felt abandoned by me? In his closet, I found a shoebox filled with letters. Letters I had sent him over the years, postcards from my travels, photos I had mailed from Denver. He had kept everything, organized chronologically, like a treasure trove of our relationship. On top of the pile was the last birthday card I had sent him, just 2 months earlier, with a note inside that read, "Dad, I hope you know how much you mean to me. I love you more than words can say." Maybe Michael was wrong. Maybe Dad had understood why I lived so far away, why I couldn't be there every day. Maybe he really had been proud of me. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed it. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Through the front window, I saw Michael getting out of his truck, his face set in hard lines. I braced myself for another confrontation, another round of accusations and guilt. He let himself in with his own key, not surprised to find me there. "I figured you'd show up here eventually," he said, not bothering with a greeting. "I needed to see his things," I said quietly, "to say goodbye properly." "Well, you've seen them. Now you can go back to Denver and get on with your life." Michael walked into the kitchen and started opening cabinets, clearly looking for something specific. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Getting the house ready to sell," he said matter-of-factly. "The realtor comes Monday to do the assessment." "Sell?" I stood up quickly. "Michael, we need to talk about this. We need to go through his things together, decide what to keep." "I've already decided," he said, not looking at me. "Most of it goes to charity. The house goes on the market. The money from the sale will cover his medical bills and funeral expenses, and whatever's left gets split between us." "You can't just make these decisions without me," I protested. "I have a say in this too." "Do you?" Michael finally looked at me, his eyes cold. "Because according to Dad's will, I'm the executor. I make the decisions. The will, of course. Can I see it?" I asked. Michael hesitated for a moment, then walked to Dad's desk in the corner of the living room. He pulled out a folder and handed me several pages of legal documents. I read through them quickly, my heart sinking with each paragraph. It was all true. Michael was named as executor, and while the assets were to be split equally between us, he had full authority to make decisions about the estate. But more than that, as I read Dad's final words, I could see the love and thought he had put into every provision. He had left me his books, his tools, his photo albums, the things that mattered, the things that held memories. And then I saw something that made my breath catch. At the very end of the will, in Dad's handwriting, was a note. "For Sarah, Check the safety deposit box at First National. Box 247. The key is in my tackle box. Michael, I said, looking up from the papers. Did you see this? About the safety deposit box? He glanced at the page and shrugged. Probably just important papers. Insurance policies, birth certificates, that kind of thing. But something in his tone made me think he hadn't really looked at this part of the will carefully. And something about Dad's handwriting, the deliberate way he had written my name, made me think there was more to it. I want to check it out, I said. Fine, but make it quick. I want this whole thing wrapped up as soon as possible. That afternoon, I drove to First National Bank, the same bank where Dad had kept his accounts for 30 years. The safety deposit box was in the basement, accessed through a maze of narrow corridors that felt like something from an old movie. The bank employee, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Rodriguez who remembered Dad, led me to box 247. He was a good man, your father, she said as she inserted her key along with mine. Always had a kind word, always asked about my family. We'll miss him coming in here. The box was larger than I had expected and surprisingly full. On top was an envelope with my name written in Dad's careful script. Underneath were more documents, what looked like property deeds, and several old photographs I had never seen before. With shaking hands, I opened the envelope addressed to me. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hope Michael gave you this note. If not, well, I figured you'd be curious enough to check anyway. You always were my little detective. I need you to know something that I never told you, something that Michael doesn't know either. It's about your mother and about land that has been in our family for generations, land that I want you to have. When your mother died, I was so lost, so focused on just getting through each day with you and Michael that I put away a lot of memories, a lot of history. But you deserve to know about your heritage, about the strong women you came from. The documents in this box will tell you about 160 acres in the hill country, about an hour west of Austin. It belonged to your great-grandmother, Elena Martinez, and it's been passed down through the women in our family for 4 generations. Your mother was supposed to get it, and someday it would have gone to you. But when she died, I couldn't bear to deal with it. I let it sit, paid the taxes, and tried to forget it existed. But it's yours now, mija. It's always been yours. I know you and Michael have your differences. I know he thinks I favor him because he stayed close, and maybe I let him think that because it made him feel important, needed. But you, Sarah, you have your mother's spirit, her independence, her strength. You needed to fly, and I wanted you to have that chance. The land is beautiful, wild, untouched. There's a small cabin there, nothing fancy, but it's peaceful. I used to take your mother there when we were first married. We dreamed of building a house there someday, maybe raising horses. Life took us in different directions, but those dreams are still there, waiting for someone brave enough to claim them. I don't know what you'll do with this gift, but I hope you'll at least go see it. Stand on that land and feel the connection to your mother, to your great-grandmother, to all the strong women who came before you. And know that wherever I am now, I'm proud of the woman you've become. All my love always, Dad. P.S. The key to the cabin is in the red tin box at the bottom of this safe deposit box. The property is in Blanco County, about 10 miles north of Johnson City. GPS coordinates are 30.3158 degree N, 98.4253 degree W. The deed is clear, taxes are current. It's yours free and clear. I read the letter 3 times before the words fully sank in. My father had left me land, not just any land, but family land. Land that connected me to a history I had never known existed, and he had kept it secret from Michael. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the deed, official and legal, transferring ownership of 160 acres from Roberto Martinez to Sarah Elena Martinez. My middle name was Elena. I had never known I was named after my great-grandmother. At the bottom of the box, just as Dad had said, was a red tin box. Inside was an old-fashioned key and a photograph of a small log cabin surrounded by oak trees with a woman standing in front of it. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, Elena Martinez, 1952. I sat in that basement room for a long time, holding the key and staring at the photograph of my great-grandmother. She looked like me, or rather, I looked like her. Same dark hair, same stubborn jawline, same eyes that seemed to hold secrets and dreams in equal measure. When I finally made it back to Dad's house, Michael was gone. He had left a note saying he was taking Dad's truck to get it appraised and would be back later. I was grateful for the solitude. I needed time to think, to process what I had learned. That evening, as I sat in Dad's chair and watched the sun set through the living room window, I made a decision. I would go see the land. Not just because Dad had left it to me, but because I needed to understand this part of my history, this connection to my mother and the women who had come before me. And maybe, just maybe, I would find something there that would help me understand why my father had kept this secret and what he had really wanted me to do with this unexpected inheritance. The next morning, I loaded my rental car with supplies, water, snacks, a map, and the key to my great-grandmother's cabin. As I drove west from Austin, leaving the city behind for the rolling hills and wide-open spaces of the Texas Hill Country, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation mixed with possibility. I had no idea that what I was about to discover would change not only my understanding of my family, but the entire direction of my life. The drive through the Texas Hill Country was like traveling through a postcard. Rolling hills covered in live oaks and wildflowers stretched as far as I could see, and the February morning was crisp and clear, with that particular quality of light that makes everything look newly created. As I followed the GPS coordinates Dad had left me, my heart was beating faster with each mile. I had studied the deed documents the night before, learning that the property was accessed through a private road that branched off from Ranch Road 165. According to the survey maps, it included a creek, several natural springs, and what was described as improvements, including one cabin structure and outbuildings. When I finally found the unmarked dirt road that matched Dad's directions, I almost missed it. It was barely wide enough for one car, overgrown with cedar and prickly pear, looking like it hadn't been used in years. But the GPS said this was it, so I turned onto the bumpy track and drove slowly, my rental car's undercarriage scraping occasionally on the rocky ground. After about half a mile, the road opened into a small clearing, and there it was, the cabin from the photograph. But seeing it in person took my breath away in a way the old picture never could have prepared me for. It was larger than it had appeared in the photo, built of honey-colored logs with a wide front porch that wrapped around two sides. The roof was metal, weathered to a soft gray-green, and morning glory vines had grown up the support posts of the porch, creating natural curtains of green. Despite being obviously vacant for years, the structure looked solid, well-maintained, like it was just waiting for someone to come home, but it was the setting that truly stunned me. The cabin sat on a small rise overlooking a valley that stretched for miles, with a creek winding through it like a silver ribbon. Ancient live oaks, some of them massive with trunks that would take 3 people holding hands to encircle, dotted the landscape. Wildflowers, bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, and dozens of varieties I couldn't identify, carpeted the ground in splashes of blue, red, and yellow. I sat in my car for several minutes, just taking it all in. This was mine. This beautiful, peaceful, perfect piece of Texas belonged to me, and I hadn't even known it existed a week ago. Finally, I got out of the car and walked toward the cabin, the key Dad had left me clutched in my hand. The wooden steps of the porch creaked under my feet, but they felt solid. The front door was painted a faded blue, and when I inserted the key, it turned easily. The door swung open with a soft groan, and I stepped into another world. The interior of the cabin was like a time capsule. The main room had a stone fireplace along one wall, with built-in bookshelves on either side. A kitchen area occupied one corner, with vintage appliances that looked like they were from the 1970s, but appeared to be in working condition. Windows on 3 sides filled the space with natural light, and everything was clean, as if someone had been taking care of it. As my eyes adjusted to the interior, I began to notice the details that made this place special. The walls were covered with photographs. Some I recognized from Dad's house, but many I had never seen. Pictures of my parents as a young couple, looking impossibly young and happy. Photos of my mother pregnant with Michael, then later with me. Pictures of family gatherings, holidays, ordinary moments that had been preserved like treasures. But it was the photographs of women that really caught my attention. Generations of them, all bearing a family resemblance that I could trace like a thread through time. My great-grandmother Elena, looking strong and determined in Depression-era clothing. My grandmother Maria, whom I barely remembered but could see now, looked exactly like my mother. And my mother, Rosa, in pictures I had never seen, laughing, working in a garden, holding a baby that must have been Michael. In the bedroom, there was just one, with a comfortable-looking bed covered in a handmade quilt. I found a trunk at the foot of the bed. Inside were letters, journals, and documents that told the story of 4 generations of Martinez women who had owned this land. Elena Martinez had bought the property in 1925 with money she earned as a seamstress, working 16-hour days to save enough for the down payment. Her journal entries, written in Spanish, described her dreams of creating a place where her family could always come home, no matter where life took them. Her daughter Maria had used the land to raise goats and chickens during World War II, selling eggs and milk to support her family when her husband was overseas. Her letters to him, carefully preserved, painted a picture of a woman of incredible strength and resourcefulness. My mother, Rosa, had written about bringing Dad here when they were dating, about their plans to build a bigger house someday, about wanting to raise her children with space to run and explore. Her last entry, dated just a few months before she died, broke my heart. I want Sarah to know about this place someday. I want her to understand that she comes from women who weren't afraid to claim their own piece of the world. As I read through these documents, sitting on the porch with the afternoon sun warming my face, I began to understand why Dad had kept this place secret for so long. It wasn't just land, it was the repository of dreams, the keeper of a family history that was too precious to risk losing, too painful to revisit after Mom died. But he had preserved it all for me. Even in his grief, even in his confusion about how to move forward after losing his wife, he had made sure the taxes were paid, the property was maintained, the legacy was protected. I was so absorbed in reading that I didn't hear the truck approaching until it was almost to the cabin. Looking up, I saw an old Ford pickup pulling into the clearing, driven by a man who appeared to be in his 70s. He parked and got out slowly, studying me with curious but friendly eyes. "You must be Sarah," he said, walking toward the porch. "I'm Jim Walsh. I've been keeping an eye on this place for your dad." Jim turned out to be a neighboring rancher who had known my father since they were both young men. Dad had hired him years ago to check on the property, to keep the cabin from falling into disrepair, to make sure everything was secure. "Your daddy was real torn up about this place after your mama died," Jim explained as we sat on the porch, and he told me stories I had never heard. He'd come out here sometimes just to sit and remember, but it hurt too much, you know? All those plans they made, all those dreams that got cut short. "Did he ever say why he didn't tell us about it?" I asked. Jim was quiet for a moment, looking out over the valley. "I think he was waiting," he said finally. "Waiting for the right time, maybe. Or waiting for you to need it. Roberto was a smart man, and he knew you had your mother's spirit. He always said you'd figure out what to do with this place when the time came." As the sun began to set, Jim showed me around the property. There was a small barn that had been converted into a workshop, filled with tools and projects that Dad had apparently worked on during his visits. A vegetable garden, overgrown now but clearly well-planned and productive in its prime. A system of rainwater collection that fed into a cistern, making the property largely self-sufficient. "The creek never runs dry," Jim told me as we walked along its banks. "Good fishing too if you're inclined. Your great-grandmother chose this spot well. It's got everything you need for a simple life." That night, I stayed in the cabin. Jim had warned me that the electricity was on a solar system that Dad had installed, adequate for basic needs, but not for running multiple appliances. The water came from a well and was cold, but clean and delicious. As darkness fell, I lit oil lamps and sat by the fireplace, reading more of my family's letters by flickering light. It was the most peaceful night I had experienced in years. No city noise, no light pollution, just the sounds of the countryside and the gentle whisper of wind through the oak trees. I slept deeply in my great-grandmother's bed, under quilts that generations of Martinez women had made with their own hands. I woke before dawn to the sound of birdsong and walked out onto the porch to watch the sun rise over the valley. As the light gradually revealed the landscape, the rolling hills, the creek, the wildflowers dancing in the morning breeze, I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was a child, a sense of belonging, of being exactly where I was supposed to be. My phone had no signal out here, which initially frustrated me, but gradually became a relief. I couldn't check work emails, couldn't scroll through social media, couldn't fill my head with the constant chatter of modern life. Instead, I spent the day exploring the property, finding hidden springs and secret meadows, discovering the trails that my mother and great-grandmother had walked before me. In one of the natural springs, I found a stone that had been carved with initials and dates: EM 1925, MM 1943, RM 1978. The tradition of the women in my family marking their presence here, claiming their connection to this place. Without really thinking about it, I found a sharp rock and carefully carved SM 2025 below my mother's initials. As I worked, I thought about my life in Denver, my apartment, my job, my friends. It was a good life, successful by most measures. I made decent money, had career prospects, enjoyed the cultural advantages of city living. But sitting there by that spring, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the hill country, I realized how disconnected I had become from anything real, anything that mattered beyond the surface. That evening, I called my boss from town, where I could get a cell signal. I explained about Dad's death, about needing more time to handle the estate. She was understanding. I rarely took time off and was generally reliable, and agreed to let me work remotely for a few weeks if necessary. But as I drove back to the cabin, I found myself wondering if I wanted to work remotely, or if I wanted to work at all in the way I had been. The projects that had seemed so important a week ago now felt trivial, disconnected from anything meaningful. Over the next few days, I fell into a rhythm. I woke with the sun, made coffee on the wood-burning stove, and spent my mornings exploring different parts of the property. In the afternoons, I worked on small repair projects around the cabin, fixing a loose board here, oiling a squeaky hinge there. In the evenings, I read my family's documents by lamplight and wrote in a journal I had found among my mother's things. Jim stopped by every couple of days, checking on me and sharing more stories about Dad, about the property, about the history of the area. I learned that our land bordered several other family ranches, some of which had been in the same families for over a century. There was a strong sense of community here, of people who looked out for each other and shared the challenges and joys of rural life. On my fourth day at the cabin, I was working in the garden, pulling weeds and trying to determine what might still be salvageable, when I heard my phone ringing from inside. I almost ignored it. I had grown to appreciate the silence, but something made me answer. It was Michael. "Where the hell are you?" he demanded without preamble. "I've been calling for days. The realtor can't do the assessment without both of us there to sign papers." "I'm at Dad's property," I said, brushing dirt off my hands. "What property?" "Dad didn't have any property except the house." I took a deep breath. "Actually, he did. He left me 160 acres in the hill country. It's been in Mom's family for generations." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. When Michael finally spoke, his voice was tight with anger. "That's impossible. I would have known about it. I handled all of Dad's affairs." "Not all of them," I said gently. "He left me a note in his safety deposit box, along with the deed." "Michael, this place is incredible. It's beautiful and peaceful and—" "I don't believe you," he interrupted. "You're making this up. Dad wouldn't have hidden property from me." "I'm not making it up," I said, feeling suddenly tired. "I can show you the deed, the note he left, everything. He wanted me to have this place." "Why you?" The pain in Michael's voice was unmistakable now. "Why would he leave something like that to you instead of splitting it between us?" I thought about how to explain what I had learned from the family documents, about the tradition of the land passing through the women in the family, about how Dad had been preserving Mom's legacy for me. But I could hear the hurt in my brother's voice, and I realized that no explanation was going to make this easier for him. "I don't know," I said finally. "Maybe because it was Mom's family land, and she wanted me to have it someday. Maybe because he thought I needed it more than you did. I honestly don't know his reasoning, Michael. I just know what he left for me." "This is unbelievable," Michael said. "First you abandon the family, then you swoop in after he dies and claim some secret inheritance? What's next, Sarah? Are you going to tell me there's buried treasure out there too?" His sarcasm stung, but I tried to keep my voice calm. "I'm not trying to take anything away from you, Michael. The house, the truck, everything else, that's still split between us just like Dad wanted. This is separate, something he specifically wanted me to have. I want to see this supposed deed," he said. "I want to see everything. If this is real, then Dad was keeping secrets from me, and I deserve to know why. Come out here," I said impulsively. "Come see the place. Maybe you'll understand better when you see it." "Fine," he said. "I'll be there tomorrow. Give me directions." After I hung up, I sat on the porch and worried about how Michael's visit would go. I could understand his hurt. He had been the one taking care of Dad, the one who had stayed close, and now it probably felt like Dad had been keeping important things from him. But I also knew that once he saw this place, once he understood the history and the significance of what Dad had preserved, he might begin to understand why it had been handled this way. That night, I walked down to the creek and sat by the water, listening to the gentle sound it made as it flowed over the rocks. I thought about my great-grandmother Elena buying this land with money she had earned one stitch at a time. I thought about my grandmother Maria, raising animals and growing food to support her family during wartime. I thought about my mother, bringing Dad here and dreaming of the life they might build. And I thought about myself, a graphic designer from Denver who had stumbled into an inheritance that connected me to generations of strong, determined women who had shaped their own destinies, women who had worked hard, saved money, bought land, and built something lasting for their families. For the first time since Dad died, I felt like I was beginning to understand not just what he had left me, but what he had expected me to do with it. This wasn't just property. It was a challenge, a test, an opportunity to decide who I wanted to be and how I wanted to live my life. The question was I brave enough to accept that challenge? Michael arrived the next afternoon in Dad's old pickup truck, and I could see the tension in his shoulders as he parked and got out. He looked around at the property with a mixture of amazement and resentment, his jaw set in that stubborn line I remembered from our childhood arguments. "So this is it," he said, not quite managing to hide his awe as he took in the cabin and the valley beyond. "This is Dad's big secret." "This is it," I confirmed, walking down from the porch to meet him. "Come on, I'll show you around." For the first hour, we walked the property in relative silence. I pointed out the various features: the creek, the springs, the old barn, the workshop where Dad had apparently spent hours working on projects we had never known about. Michael asked practical questions about water rights, property boundaries, tax assessments, approaching it like the business transaction he seemed determined to view it as. But I could see him softening as we explored. When we reached the spring where I had carved my initials, he knelt down and traced the letters that our mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother had carved before us. "Mom was here," he said quietly, running his finger over the RM 1978. "She was here, and we never knew. She loved this place," I said, sitting down beside him on the smooth rock. "I found her journal entries in the cabin. She and Dad used to come here all the time when they were first married. They had plans to build a bigger house, maybe raise horses." Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring at the carved initials. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Why didn't he tell me? All those years I was taking care of him, helping with his finances, making sure his affairs were in order. Why would he keep this from me?" I pulled out the letter Dad had left me and handed it to Michael. "Maybe this will help explain." He read it twice, his expression changing from anger to hurt to something approaching understanding. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and handed it back to me. "He thought I needed to be the responsible one," Michael said finally. "The one who stayed home, who took care of things, who kept the family together. And he thought you needed to fly." "Maybe he was right," I said softly. "Maybe we both needed different things. But why give you the land? Why not leave it to both of us?" I thought about how to explain what I had learned from the family documents, about the tradition I was only beginning to understand myself. "It wasn't really his to give away," I said finally. "It was always meant to pass from mother to daughter, from woman to woman in the family. Dad was just the keeper of it after Mom died, making sure it would be there when I was ready for it." Michael stood up and walked to the edge of the spring, his back to me. "So what are you going to do with it?" he asked. "Sell it? Use it as a vacation home? Add it to your portfolio?" The question hit me harder than I expected, because I realized I had been avoiding thinking about it seriously. "I don't know," I admitted. "A week ago, I didn't even know this place existed. Now, I'm supposed to decide what to do with 160 acres and a family legacy I'm just beginning to understand." "Well, you better figure it out," Michael said, turning back to face me, "because maintaining a property like this isn't cheap. The taxes alone are probably more than you realize, and if you're planning to keep it as some kind of weekend retreat while you live in Denver, you're going to need someone local to take care of it." There was an edge to his voice that made me look at him more carefully. "Are you offering?" I asked. "Maybe," he said. "For the right arrangement. Jim Walsh is getting too old to keep doing the maintenance, and I know this land better than anyone now. I've been coming out here with Dad for the past 5 years, helping him with repairs, learning the systems he put in place. This was news to me. Dad brought you here? Every few months, Michael said. He said he needed help with projects, but now I think he was trying to prepare me to help you when the time came. He never told me why the place was important, just that it needed to be maintained, protected. I felt a wave of gratitude toward Dad, even in death, still trying to take care of both his children, still trying to bridge the gap between us. What kind of arrangement did you have in mind? Michael sat back down beside me, and for the first time since he had arrived, his expression was open, almost hopeful. I've been thinking about leaving Austin, he said. Jennifer and I have been talking about it for months. The city's getting too expensive, too crowded. The kids are old enough now that a change of scenery might be good for them. You want to move out here? I asked, surprised. Not here specifically, he said quickly. I wouldn't presume to live on your land, but there are several properties for sale in the area, and with the money from Dad's house, we could probably afford something decent. Rural properties are still reasonable compared to Austin real estate. I could see where this was heading, and part of me was excited by the possibility. And you could help maintain this place? I could do more than maintain it, Michael said, warming to the idea. I've been learning about sustainable agriculture, about land management. This property has incredible potential. The soil is good, the water is reliable, the climate is perfect for a variety of crops. You could have a working ranch here, something that pays for itself and maybe even turns a profit. I don't know anything about farming or ranching, I pointed out. But you could learn, Michael said, and you wouldn't have to do it alone. Look, Sarah, I know we haven't gotten along well lately. I know I've been angry and resentful about a lot of things, but maybe this is an opportunity for both of us to start over. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking, really talking, for the first time in years. Michael told me about his frustrations with his job as a construction supervisor, about his dreams of working for himself, about Jennifer's interest in homeschooling their kids in a rural environment. I told him about my growing dissatisfaction with my career, about feeling disconnected from anything meaningful, about the peace I had found in just a few days at the cabin. As the sun began to set, we walked back to the cabin together. Michael examined the structure with a professional eye, pointing out the solid construction, the thoughtful design, the potential for expansion. Dad and I replaced the roof 2 years ago, he said, running his hand along the metal panels. And we upgraded the solar system last spring. The place is in better shape than it looks. Inside, he showed me improvements that I hadn't noticed. New wiring, updated plumbing, a more efficient water heater. Dad hadn't just been maintaining the property. He had been steadily improving it, preparing it for someone to actually live here. He knew, Michael said as we sat on the porch watching the stars come out. Somehow he knew you'd end up here eventually. All these improvements, all the work we did, it was for you. That night, Michael stayed in the cabin with me, sleeping on the couch and sharing stories about his visits here with Dad. I learned that they had talked about me often, that Dad had worried about my happiness in Denver, that he had hoped someday I would find my way back to Texas and to the family. He missed you, Michael said. Even when he was proud of your success, even when he supported your choices, he missed having you close. But he never wanted you to come back out of obligation. He wanted you to come back because you chose to. And now? I asked. Now I think he's given you the perfect reason to choose, Michael said. The next morning, we drove into Johnson City together to meet with a local attorney who specialized in agricultural law. I wanted to understand exactly what I had inherited, what the responsibilities were, what the options might be for the future. The attorney, a woman named Patricia Gonzalez, who had grown up in the area, was familiar with our property and with the Martinez family history. She confirmed that the deed was clear, the taxes were current, and that I had full ownership of the land and everything on it. Your great-grandmother was quite a woman, Patricia told me as we reviewed the documents. She was one of the first Hispanic women in this county to own land outright, and she fought to keep it during some very difficult times. The fact that it stayed in your family for 4 generations is remarkable. She also explained the agricultural exemptions that kept the property taxes low, the water rights that came with the land, and the various programs available to help beginning farmers and ranchers get started. The more she talked, the more feasible Michael's ideas began to sound. What about zoning? I asked. If I wanted to build additional structures, Maybe start some kind of agricultural business. The county is very supportive of agricultural development, Patricia said. As long as you're following sustainable practices and staying within the guidelines for rural properties, you have a lot of flexibility. Many people in this area are doing agritourism, farm-to-table operations, even educational programs about sustainable living. After the meeting, Michael and I drove around the area, looking at other properties that were for sale, talking to neighbors, getting a feel for the community. Everyone we met was friendly, welcoming, eager to share their knowledge about rural living and sustainable agriculture. At lunch in a small cafe in Johnson City, we met another couple, David and Maria Santos, who had moved from San Antonio 5 years earlier to start an organic farm. They were enthusiastic about their decision and generous with advice about the challenges and rewards of rural life. The first year is hard, Maria admitted. Everything takes longer than you expect, costs more than you budget for, and requires skills you don't know you need. But by the second year, you start to find your rhythm. And by the third year, you can't imagine living any other way. The key is starting small, David added. Don't try to transform everything at once. Pick 1 or 2 projects, learn them well, then gradually expand. And find mentors, people in the community who've been doing this longer and are willing to share their knowledge. As we drove back to the cabin that afternoon, I found myself seriously considering the possibility of making this place my home, not just my inheritance. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Are you really thinking about it? Michael asked as we pulled into the clearing. I think I am, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I think I'm really thinking about it. That evening, we called Jennifer and put her on speakerphone so she could hear about the property, about our conversations, about the possibilities we had been discussing. She was cautiously enthusiastic, asking practical questions about schools, medical care, internet access, all the things that matter when you have children to consider. The kids would love it, she said finally. They're always complaining about not having enough space to play, about too much screen time. And honestly, Mike, you've been talking about wanting to work for yourself for years. Maybe this is the push we need. After we hung up, Michael and I sat on the porch and made lists, practical lists about what it would take to make this work. I would need to give notice at my job, sell my apartment, figure out how to generate income from a rural property. Michael would need to find buyers for his house, research properties in the area, plan a career transition. But underneath all the practical considerations was something more fundamental. The recognition that both of us were ready for a change, ready to build something meaningful with our hands and our hearts, ready to honor the legacy of strong women who had shaped their own destinies on this very land. Dad would be proud, Michael said, as we watched the last of the sunset fade behind the hills. I think he would, I agreed. I think he'd be proud of both of us. So we're really going to do this? He asked. You're going to move back to Texas, and I'm going to become a farmer? I laughed, but there was no doubt in my voice when I answered. I think we are. I think we're going to honor Mom's legacy and Dad's gift by building something amazing here. Together, Michael said, and it wasn't a question. Together, I confirmed. As we sat there in the peaceful darkness, I felt something shift inside me. The anger and resentment that had been eating at both of us began to dissolve, replaced by excitement and possibility. We were going to honor our parents' memory, not by fighting over their legacy, but by working together to build something worthy of the sacrifices they had made. For the first time since Dad died, I felt like his death had meaning, like his life had meaning, like the choices he had made to preserve this place and bring us together had been exactly what we needed, even if we hadn't known it at the time. The land that had been kept secret was going to bring us home. 6 months later, I stood on the same porch where I had made the decision to change my life. But now, everything was different. The morning mist was rising from the valley, and I could hear the gentle lowing of cattle in the distance. Not mine yet, but Jim Walsh's, who had been generous in letting us observe and learn from his operation. My apartment in Denver was sold, my job was a memory, and my savings account was considerably lighter after purchasing everything I needed to start my new life. But I had never been happier. The cabin had been expanded with a small addition that served as my office, where I ran a freelance graphic design business that allowed me to work remotely while building my new rural life. The reliable internet that had been installed throughout the hill country had made this transition possible, and I found that my Denver clients actually appreciated the more thoughtful, less hurried approach I brought to projects now. But it was the farm operation that really excited me. Working with Michael, who had bought a property just 3 miles down the road, we had started small: a vegetable garden that supplied the local farmers market, a small flock of chickens, and plans for expanding into heritage breed livestock. Michael had thrown himself into learning sustainable agriculture with the same intensity he had once brought to construction management. He had attended workshops, read countless books, and formed relationships with other farmers in the area who served as mentors and advisors. Jennifer loved the rural lifestyle even more than she had expected, and their kids, Emma and Jake, had become confident, capable children who could gather eggs, help with garden maintenance, and navigate the countryside with the ease of natives. This morning was special because we were hosting our first farm tour for people interested in sustainable agriculture. Over the past few months, word had spread about what we were building here, and we had been contacted by several couples and families who were considering making similar transitions from urban to rural life. I walked down to the garden where Michael was already working, checking the irrigation system he had installed using principles of permaculture and water conservation. The garden was thriving in ways that still amazed me: neat rows of vegetables, herbs growing in companion plantings, beneficial insects humming around flowers that served both aesthetic and practical purposes. "How many people are coming today?" he asked, as I helped him adjust one of the drip irrigation lines. 12, I said. 3 families from Austin, a couple from San Antonio, and a few individuals who are thinking about career changes similar to what we did. "Are you nervous?" he asked, grinning at me. "Terrified," I admitted. 6 months ago, I didn't know the difference between a tomato plant and a weed. Now I'm supposed to be teaching people about sustainable living? "You'll be fine," Michael said confidently. "You know more than you think you do, and more importantly, you're honest about what you don't know. People appreciate that." The tour group arrived at 10 o'clock, and I was struck by how eager and hopeful they all looked. They reminded me of myself 6 months earlier, successful in their current lives, but searching for something more meaningful, more connected to the earth and to authentic community. I started the tour at the spring, where 4 generations of Martinez women had carved their initials, telling the story of how I had inherited not just land, but a legacy of women who had chosen to shape their own destinies. I shared the letter Dad had left me, the family documents that had revealed a history I never knew existed, the gradual realization that this place was offering me a chance to build something meaningful with my own hands. "The most important thing I've learned," I told the group as we walked through the garden, "is that you don't have to know everything before you start. You just have to be willing to learn, to make mistakes, to ask for help when you need it." Michael showed them the workshop where he had been learning traditional skills: woodworking, metal fabrication, equipment repair. He demonstrated the rainwater collection system that Dad had installed and that we had expanded, explaining how it made the property largely water independent. "The goal isn't to go backwards to some imaginary simpler time," he explained. "It's to combine the best of traditional knowledge with modern technology to create systems that are sustainable, efficient, and beautiful." Jennifer joined us for the portion of the tour that focused on homeschooling and raising children in a rural environment. Emma and Jake, now 10 and 8, helped demonstrate the chicken operation and talked about their responsibilities on the farm with the kind of confidence and maturity that impressed all the adults. "They understand where their food comes from," Jennifer explained. "They know the work that goes into growing vegetables and raising animals. They're learning skills that will serve them no matter what they choose to do with their lives." But the moment that really captured everyone's attention came when we reached the overlook where you could see the entire valley. One of the women, a marketing executive from Austin named Lisa, stood there for a long moment, just taking in the view. "How do you know if you're ready for this?" she asked quietly. "How do you know if you have what it takes to make such a dramatic change?" I thought about my answer carefully, remembering my own fears and doubts just 6 months earlier. "I don't think you ever know for sure," I said finally, "but I think you know when you're ready to find out." For me, it wasn't about being certain I could succeed. It was about being certain I would regret it if I didn't try. After the tour group left, Michael and I sat on the porch and talked about the questions they had asked, the fears they had expressed, the excitement in their eyes when they talked about their dreams for a different kind of life. 3 of them are seriously considering it, Michael said. I could tell by the questions they were asking about land prices and local regulations. Lisa's going to do it, I said confidently. Did you see how she looked when she was standing by the creek? She's already planning where she'd put her garden. Think we're starting something? Michael asked. I think we're continuing something, I said. Something that Elena started when she bought this land. Something that Mom and Dad preserved. Something that was always meant to grow and spread and inspire other people to take control of their own lives. That evening, I walked down to the creek by myself, something I did most evenings as a way to decompress and reflect on the day. The fireflies were just beginning to emerge, blinking like tiny stars in the gathering darkness. I thought about the phone call I had received that afternoon from my former boss in Denver. She had offered me a promotion, a significant raise, a chance to return to the corporate world with more responsibility and prestige than I had ever had before. 6 months ago, that call would have been tempting. The money was certainly appealing, and part of me missed the energy and sophistication of city life. But as I sat by the creek, listening to the water flow over the rocks and watching the stars appear in a sky unmarked by light pollution, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. I had found something here that I hadn't even known I was looking for. A sense of purpose, a connection to the land and to my family history, a way of living that felt authentic and meaningful. I was working harder than I ever had in my life, but it was work that mattered, work that built something lasting, work that honored the women who had come before me and created something valuable for the generations that might come after. My phone buzzed with a text message from Michael. Jennifer wants to know if you're coming for dinner. She made tamales. I smiled and typed back, on my way. As I walked back toward the lights of the cabin, I thought about Dad, about the final gift he had given me. He had known, somehow, that I would need this place, this challenge, this opportunity to discover who I really was when stripped of all the external measures of success I had been chasing. The land that no one knew about had become the foundation for a life I couldn't have imagined, a relationship with my brother that was stronger than it had ever been, and a sense of belonging that connected me to generations of strong women who had refused to let circumstances define their possibilities. Behind me, the creek continued its eternal flow toward the valley, carrying with it the dreams and hopes of all the people who had stood on its banks and chosen to build something meaningful with their own hands. Ahead of me, the cabin glowed with warm light, filled with family and the promise of tamales and stories about the day's small victories and minor disasters. I was home, finally and completely home, in a way I had never been before. And tomorrow, there would be more work to do, more dreams to build, more reasons to be grateful for the secret inheritance that had changed everything. Dad had been right. I had needed to fly, to learn who I was on my own terms, but he had also preserved the place where I could land when I was ready, the place where I could build a life worthy of the legacy he had protected and the love he had never stopped believing I would find my way back to. The land that had been hidden had become the foundation for a future that was brighter and more meaningful than anything I could have planned for myself. And as I climbed the steps to the porch where my family was waiting, I knew that Elena Martinez would have been proud of what her great-granddaughter had chosen to build on the land she had claimed with such courage almost a century before. Some inheritances are measured in money, but the best ones are measured in possibilities. And this land, this legacy, this chance to build something authentic and lasting, it was the richest inheritance any woman could ask for.